Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg, welcome to this Tuesday edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight, striking mine workers vow to fight on and are demanding that President Cyril Ramaphosa intervene. AMCU and NUM leaders are on standby with the latest.
The incident in Stellenbosch is one too many in recent months. Like I've said, it is akin to defecting, urinating on the Constitution itself.
Continue to shine the spotlight on the scourge that is racism and racial intolerance. Activist and psychologist Professor Seth Scooper delves deep into the issues that are making racism difficult to deal with. All that and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. Sibanye-Stillwater employees have vowed to continue camping outside the union buildings in Pretoria until President Cyril Ramaphosa intervenes. The AMCU and NUM affiliated workers are demanding 1,000 rands a month increase plus 6% in living wages. Sibanye-Stillwater says the demand is unaffordable. Notando Magudulela has the latest.
Sibanye-Stillwater workers say they won't leave the union buildings until the president addresses them. The workers have been camping outside the country's seat of power since last week Thursday. They want Sibanye-Stillwater to increase their wages by 1,000 rand plus 6% and to also pay them a 100 rand leaving out allowance.
The situation still remains the same since workers arrived there at union buildings last week. Workers are requesting for the president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, to intervene since they've tried all sorts of efforts to end the strike. I'm reliably informed that yesterday there was a meeting with officials from the presidency, DMRE and the Labour, but nothing came out of that meeting. So the situation still remains the same. Workers are still waiting for the president to come and address them or to intervene at Sibanye-Stillwater go strike.
These workers say the president should at least come and address them and hear their pleas. The female mine workers are especially hoping that Ramaphosa will understand their plight, considering his previous experience in the mining industry.
We are hurt. As you see us here in Pretoria, we left our children at home hungry. We can't rent. We are mothers and fathers. We can't even pay for our children's tuition fees.
We are here because we are hungry. Nobody is helping us. We chose the president, but he does not care about us.
What we want is a 1,000 rand. We came here for two things, a 1,000 rand and for Sibanye's license to be revoked. Sibanye must leave.
Sibanye-Stillwater says it will engage with government should authorities approach the company regarding its mining license. It says it will meet unions alongside the CCMA next week in a bid to reach an agreement.
We've been trying to come to an agreement to end the strike, which we realize is really inflicting a lot of financial hardship on our employees and on communities around our operations, and trying to bring an end to the strike. So we have actually reached out to the unions in the last couple of days and asked them whether they would be willing to meet under the auspices of the CCMA again for conciliation, and they have agreed, and we believe we will have our first meeting next week in this regard.
Notando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, joining us on the line is AMCU President Joseph Matunjwa, and from the NUM we have Bonginkosi Mkhasi. Good evening to both of you, gentlemen, and thank you so much for your time.
Good evening to you and the viewers and to the comrade.
Let me start with you, Mr. Matunjwa, if I may. James Wellstead from Sibanye-Stillwater says that they've reached out to you, and he's hoping that you are going to meet under the auspices of the CCMA next week. Are you able to confirm that?
Thank you. Indeed, we did receive such a request or a referral to CCMA requesting the facilitation, of which both trade union has agreed to meet with them.
And take us through, Mr. Mkhasi, if you will, sort of the latest. What was the latest offer made by Stillwater?
I think the latest offer, it is still on 800 rands for first year, and 50 rands living out allowance, and 800 rands for the second year, and 50 rands for living out allowance, 800 rands for the third year, and 50 rands for allowance, and 5% for officials. Mm-hmm. That's the latest offer that they gave to both unions.
Mm-hmm. And last week, that offer was, of course, rejected, Mr. Mkhasi, by the workers.
Yes, I think the offer has been there in the table. It's not a new thing. Mm-hmm. They've indicated that they've never changed their offer. So workers has rejected their offer, and they stick to their demand, which is 1,000 rand and a 6% and 100 rands living out allowance.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Matunjwa, if then the company is adamant that the offer that they have given so far is the best that they can do, what hope is there that a CCMA process will deliver a better result?
Yeah, I think that it's what we say $1 million question. I think Froneman is the one, as a Prime Minister of South Africa. I think he has a change of heart and realized that this 300 million that he's been awarded for killing workers for the last financial year has given his foot soldiers a new mandate to agree on 1,000 rand. We hope for that, because I mean, the manner in which Neil Froneman is treating the workers, it's no longer about an employer saving cost. It's just a hatred of a black African. In his heart, he hates blacks. These women who are sitting in the park during this night, leaving their families, how does he go to bed? How does he sleep? Knowingly that he does have money, he do have money. He's not saying he's pleading poverty. He's even saying we can go for 2 years on strike. So I think also the government itself surely can play a huge role. If they can regulate farm workers and domestic workers, what about the mining sector? Why the government is not regulated? Then the mining sector should be highly regulated, because we contribute a huge percentage in terms of GDP of this country. And furthermore, in 2012, Marikana massacre, which is Sibanye Stillwater massacre, workers, they put 12,500 as a minimum wage. So if the government can say every surface worker in any mining sector should receive 12,500 and 17,000 for underground, one could look at the CPI in terms of percentile increment.
Now, is that what you want? Is that the message you want to give to the president by insisting that, by the workers insisting that he must intervene? Is that the message you will be sending to him?
Yes, indeed. It's not only that. One, we have to keep the maximum of this CO. The CO cannot just get 300 million out of the expense, in the expense of the workers. They must keep the salaries of the CO, and two, the 60-40 capping of the export of commodities of South Africa should be 40% must be for industrialization and beneficiation in the country. Those things are crucial in terms of addressing the unemployment in this country. And one can also agree with us that since 1994, workers have experienced the deterioration of the social wage. So whatever that we get, we have to pay expensive for the healthcare system, education, transport, and so forth. So therefore, every increase that we receive, we don't even afford to buy 3 loaves of bread each family per week, because of the deterioration of the social wage that we have to compensate for transport and for healthcare. For the healthcare. So those things the president has to take it into account.
Well, Mr. Mkhasi, you would have seen, Neil Froneman, saying, I think it was in the Sunday Times, that he deserves every cent of that 300 million rands package.
Look, it is a shame for one CEO to go in public and claim that he deserves every cent of the 300 million, whilst workers that goes underground on a daily basis can't even receive 8,000 rand. If I was the CEO or executive, even the board, I was to be able to convene an agent meeting and tell the CEO to withdraw that. Because it can't be that you smile alone.
Okay, Mr. Mkhasi, we seem to have a problem with your line there. If I may come back to you, Mr. Matunjwa, and I was reading an article in Times Live where Neil Froneman, defending his remuneration package, says, and I quote, "We have, as an executive, outperformed. We have tripled the number of people we employ. We have saved about 30,000 jobs in gold with assets that would have closed in 5 years. We have saved Lonmin. Lonmin pays for itself every 4 to 6 months. We have created value from 15 billion rands to 150 billion. What do you say to that?
This Froneman is got Jezebel spirit. If you read the books of Kings in the Bible, he's got that spirit. He cannot blow his own trumpet. What about Harmony, his competitor? Harmony has employed over 50,000 workers. In 2020, 2021, during the pandemic of this coronavirus, Mr. Steenkamp, the CEO of Harmony, paid his employees full salary for 2 years during the pandemic. And we concluded an agreement of 1,000 rand of a 3-year agreement. Furthermore, he gave his workers, it's better than nothing. A share scheme that is not paying less than 14,000 rand. When come to Sibanye, is bragging about 30,000 workers that has got a scheme that he pays them 50 rand. So, where is the comparison? The competitor Harmony is employing more employees than Sibanye and is paying better, far better conditions of employment than Sibanye. The point that we want to put across to the state president or to the Minister of Mineral and Resources, revoke this license, give to our black brothers who can form consortium and run this mine. Froneman does not come from heaven. He is not a divine person who had to, dictate our future. He's just a human being like anyone. This license is the government license on our behalf. Government is a custodian of the minerals. We are the owners of this mineral, not Neil Froneman. Froneman is not our God. We'll never bow for him. He's a mortal man.
Mr. Mkhasi, just your thoughts, to that defense that Mr. Froneman has put out, saying they have outperformed, tripled numbers of people that they employed, saved jobs, saved the mine, which is now paying for itself, has created value for his shareholders from 15 billion to 150 billion?
Look, I think Comrade President is correct. It is a total lie. You must be able to confirm that Sibanye has been retrenching people. During the COVID, people have been retrenched through a process called mutual separate package. people were told that they've got chronic diseases, so therefore they were removed from the system. So there's no company that have saved jobs here. It is only the workers that have contributed to the total company assets. It is the same workers, especially gold, that has made today that the company can have still water in the USA, it can have a battery company in Canada, it can have the platinum. So it can't be that he has grown that alone. It is the same gold mine workers today that are denied an opportunity just to receive a mere 1,000 rands, a 6%, and only 100 rand allowance. Imagine we are requesting a 100 rand allowance for a living out allowance, which we all know how much is a rental to any place within the country. It is so much expensive. So it can't be that he's a messiah today. He must be glorified that he has saved jobs. That is not true. We know that the same company has closed down cook operations that they've bought within 5 years' time. They've retrenched more thousands of workers in that particular period. So it can't be that he has done that. It is not the true reflection of what is happening on the ground.
Now, those men and women camping as we speak outside the union buildings, their other demand is that something you touched on, Mr. Matunja, just now, is that the Mineral Resources Minister, Gwede Mandashe, must honor the promise that he has made to withdraw the company's mining rights if it continues to, status quo continues. Is that not something that would hurt the workers in the end?
No, as my comrade has explained to you that Sibanye bought Cook's mines and mothballed them, and those workers were retrenched. So therefore, by revoking the license, you're giving to another employer or another potential entrepreneur. As I've said, there are many black brothers of ours, brothers and sisters who are highly competent, who are schooled in this field, who are running the mines. You can look at Sianda Bakhatla is run by Black Consortium. So what is wrong if then Mr. Gwede Mandashe can revoke this license from Sibanye and then give it to the, to other companies? Even Harmony wanted to buy, Sibanye, and then so he didn't want to sell to them. But however, in this point in time, we are saying the minister must revoke this license. Sibanye never voted for this government. Sibanye, Neil Froneman benefited from the Nationalist Party and is still benefiting in our democratic dispensation time. So I think time is up for him. We cannot glorify him. He is not our God. We are here, we are South African. If these minerals make him to be a little god or a deputy god, I think he has come to an end. We are not going to bow for Neil Froneman. This 1,000 rand he must give these workers. If this government was elected by us, we put in power and they are there with our mandate and they see Froneman is enslaving their electorate, it's high time that they must revoke that license and even give it to workers. You remember at Lonmin, workers at Lonmin wanted to buy Lonmin, 6 billion rand. Workers through their provident fund were prepared by the government, assisted Neil Froneman to acquire. You'll remember AMCO was against, we went to court, to High Court in Cape Town to defend that this mine mustn't be sold to Froneman because we knew what kind of a person he is.
Mr. Mkhasi, have you received any correspondence from the presidency regarding your demand that he intervene?
No, there is nothing from the president. I think both unions, including the president, I think we're part of a meeting this afternoon with state security in trying to find what are the issues, and they will be briefing the state president with the matters that we want to address to him. We hope that by tomorrow there will be a light or indication of when are we going to receive the feedback from the state president.
Who exactly
confirmed that during that meeting, we managed to be notified.
Okay, that line continues to give us problems. Ms. Matunjwa, who exactly did the unions meet this afternoon?
It was a state security who was sent by the government to us, of which I was a little bit disturbed or worried. Why should the government send a state security to get any information about labor issues? You know, I mean, for me, it was really disturbing because it just reminded me Marikana at the end of the day. I don't see how the state security come into the labor issues. Maybe they should have sent a DG from Department of Labor. That could have been better. But to send a state security to get information about labor issues, I smell a rat here.
Mm-hmm. Did they give any indication as to when they hope to get back to you and give you an update as to whether the president will be able to see you or his ministers?
Yes, I mean, they said they're going to inform the state president this evening, and subsequent, after they receive the confirmation or any response from him, they will contact our general secretaries, both from our trade unions. That was it. And apparently there is a meeting lined for tomorrow. I don't know whether it will proceed, but there is a meeting lined for tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mkhasi, how hopeful are you that the president will honor that promise that he made on May Day?
Seeing the actions now, remember this is a 6th day where workers are still in union buildings. Not that it doesn't know that workers are there. But we still hope, with a little hope that he will still respect workers. So we'll just have to wait for maybe tomorrow and see that indeed the state president still has conscience on worker issues. So we'll then see after tomorrow that maybe he's still concerned about issues that pertain to workers, or is no longer interested. He's only leading the bourgeoisie classes or the investors' interest.
Mr. Matunjwa, are you hopeful that the president will come through for you in the end?
I'm not really hopeful. I mean, if you look, he has promised to go and meet the widows at Marikane. It's 10 years down the line. Nothing has happened. But, I mean, one cannot judge a person while he's still alive. I mean, maybe he had a change of heart. Maybe he will change his heart and meet the workers, as he promised in Rustenburg.
Okay, that's where we are going to leave it for this evening. Thank you very much to both of you for your time this evening.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your viewers, and thank you, comrade.
Okay. I'm Co-President Joseph Matunjwa, and from the NUM we had its Regional Secretary Bonginkosi Mkhasi. After the break, racism and racial discrimination in South Africa. Activist and psychologist Professor Seth Scooper delves deep into the issues that are making racism difficult to fight. Welcome back. Now, if you watched the program yesterday, you would have heard of that study whose findings were made public yesterday at a conference that ended today. Here's how one of the authors of the report, Dr. Stephen Gordon, summed up the findings of the study last night here on the program.
We used nationally representative public opinion data to examine self-reported levels of racism and interracial attitudes in the country. The results, unfortunately, are quite negative. Many people feel that at the very least they are sometimes personally racially discriminated against, with minorities feeling that they are either often or always racially discriminated against. Levels of perceived racial discrimination have increased in 2020 and 2021. Currently, almost half of the adult population of South Africa says that they feel racially discriminated against at least sometimes. Many people see other racial groups as a threat, not only to their economic position, but to their political, social, and cultural positions within South African society. There is a feeling that we cannot trust people of other racial groups, and unfortunately, levels of interracial contacts don't always provide the cohesive, friendly bridge building that we would like to see. The data presented in the baseline study is extremely wide-ranging, showing the necessity of the National Action Plan against racism and racial intolerance, demonstrating that we need to devote appropriate resources to this issue. This is a sizable problem and demands a sizable response. Credit should be given to the Department of Justice for stepping up to try and address one of the most difficult problems in our country at the moment.
Dr. Gordon speaking here on the program yesterday, speaking to a study that they were commissioned to do, and the results of which he just spoke about there. Now, on Sunday, my next guest penned an article that looked at some of the things that are making the fight against the racism scourge difficult. Professor Seth Cooper couldn't join us yesterday. He joins us now. Welcome back, Prof, and thank you for your time.
Pleasure, I would say, but we're dealing with a very difficult topic and one that we need to actually grapple with frontally. Yeah. I listened to Dr. Gordon, and I think that we actually continue to racialize a problem which is one of the human family. We are a human family. The construct of race is a social one, and there is no other basis for it than to perpetuate difference that actually is artificial and literally skin deep, and ought not to remain from the apartheid era in our statute books, for instance. So we've borrowed hook, line, and sinker the final apartheid classification. I think you and I will remember the time when groups were called various other names, from native through to plural, Bantu, etc. And that is the African majority, and largely because the Trek Boers arrogated unto themselves the name of African. They called themselves Afrikaners. So that they had to be the ones to settle the southern tip of Africa, because otherwise the land question will come into serious contestation, as it has now. And they call themselves the Africans in their language, in Dutch, turned into Afrikaans, to exclude everybody else. So let's start there. That's the historicity of that in a nutshell. It gets perpetuated because many of us have bought hook, line, and sinker into racial classifications. I can appreciate very well, and initially, when the first democratic census took place, I was skeptical but supported the idea of a developmental quest, that the areas that needed development, we need to count people in order to ensure that adequate resources go there. Clearly, 28 years into democracy, we failed in that quest. Indeed, the communities, they hardly exist, but the neighborhoods that are there are fairly mixed in various ways, except for those urban reservoirs of labor. This Soweto is hardly like the townships surrounding Windhoek, Harare, which was a township and then became the capital of Zimbabwe. We have spread, if you like, slumification instead of focusing on development. But that's a topic for another day. The issue is that we did not deal with the biggest problem that we confront, and that is, outside of colonialism, naked racism. We bought into the rainbow reconciliation that the big names, the Desmond Tutus, the Mandelas, braided in the mid-90s, the heady days of 94 and the couple of years thereafter. Then we went pear-shaped because we have all sorts of entities dealing with various minutiae, but we don't have anything to deal with racism. And if the president has to pen a letter talking about racism 28 years later, and he's what, the fifth president in the country? My arithmetic may be wrong. It says that our leadership has not confronted and dealt with racism, which we ought to have dealt with in the 90s. Okay. We allowed ethnicity instead to grow. And then we started looking at each other in a way of language differences, narrow ethnicity. Whenever a problem arises, I'm going to blame Vuyo Mvoko because you speak X language and I don't. So I'll blame your language. In order to account for my dispossession and your entitlement and vice versa. So we need to actually deal with that racism, not through the law, because our laws already have areas that we can deal with these kinds of crude expressions. What we need to do is actually stop, have a compact, and say that racism is endemic in our society. We can eradicate it, and we can eradicate it through a more realistic educational system from the kindergarten upward. If we focus on using English as the language of communication only and speak to adults, many of us are set in our ways. We're not going to change. But if we can start with our kids, we will change. And the shocking thing about the Stellenbosch University incident is people have raised that this young man grew up.
Prof, before you get there, can I stop you? Sure. If you don't mind, I want to. I mean, you've raised so many issues, and I want to take you back to some of the issues that you've raised before we get to the Stellenbosch episode more specifically. When you say that we bought into the whole apartheid classification, what exactly do you mean by that, and why is that a problem?
Well, we did not acknowledge we're a human family. We are one human family. If we want to use the term race, there is a human race. We are a species that has the same biology. Our biology is the same. If there is a congenital difference, then it's an exception. There's a major reproductory difference between males and females, for instance, and I won't deal with any other gendering there. There's external difference, which makes us wealthy, which makes us look different. And that level of melanation and maybe hair texture cannot be used for any distinction besides racism, besides wanting to put people in narrow boxes. And how often have some of our children not been asked, by the way, where are you from? You don't look like X or Y. And our kids speak. And if you close your eyes, you won't know whether that kid is that X or Y so-called race. Race is a social discriminatory construct. Anthropologists agree, and we still perpetuate that. There is no purpose served by continuing to perpetuate the colonial unless we ourselves don't feel we are equal. If I feel that I am less of a human being because the melanin in my pigmentation is enhanced versus somebody else who is melanin depleted, as it were, then we've got a problem. If I am scared to confront one of the groups that media regularly, almost on a daily basis, calls civil society groups, when they are downright racist, they want to hanker after a system of bring back the old flag, bring back that hierarchy, because we can do it. Look at how you've messed up. Our kids grow up with an inferiority complex when they ought not to, because adults, leadership feels inferior. At the rendezvous of victory, Vuyo, we had half human beings leading us with notable exceptions. So if I felt I am a non-white, if you take out white from that term, you are left with a non-nihil, nothing, negative. I cannot be a negative of anything, especially another person. I have to be affirmed as myself. So the ability to grow a nation starts with a basic patriotism where we identify together as one people. We don't. We're a warring group of ethnicities, each striving to be better than the other. During Mbeki's time, we said it was a Cosa Nostra. During Zuma's time, we said it was the time of the Zulus. I mean, how can we carry on in that way?
What should we have done, Prof, right from the beginning?
We should have acknowledged we're a society that comes from one of the most virulent and deeply racist societies after Nazi Germany, for which the United Nations was then created, and the Bill of Rights, the various covenants, including the International Criminal Court, saying that apartheid was a crime against humanity.
But in very real and practical ways, what should we have done?
We should have recognized that we're dealing with racism. We could not move from racism, extreme racism, to laissez-faire democracy. We should transition ourselves and prepare all of ourselves for saying, this is where we are going to, and this is how long it will take. It was almost an instant move from apartheid to democracy on is the Zelda, when we are actually the same, but we're not treating ourselves and others in the same way. So in order to be free of racism, we should have acknowledged it. We did not. The next step is education. Nothing in our education, 28 years after democracy, prepares us for dealing with that scourge. So it will be ex-school now that poor MEC Panyaza Lessufi has to deal with, and then Wim de Villiers has to deal with in Stellenbosch University. It will continue unless we come to an understanding that we need to start, particularly with kids, early childhood into primary school. And my view is we need to forget any adult right now, because those messages will go into ears that are not prepared to open to entertain the other. We need to show young kids the sense of civic and self-pride, civic responsibility, the ability to act and be a South African. What does it take to be that? Then you can say, I am Vuyo Mvoko. I speak isiXhosa. I also speak XYZ language. I grew up in whichever part of the country. I identify with X religion, but I cannot be a color. I cannot be an ethnicity. I cannot be a narrow culture. I cannot be something that somebody else wants to bestow on me. And for crying out loud, it's about time that we really looked at the narrow boxes we have continued to confine ourselves and our people into. And this is a period where our census is actually ending right now. So we need to rethink how we do this.
I don't know if you've had sight of this National Action Plan to fight racism. And from the conversations I was having last night, and all the panelists were, in agreement on this one, saying, look, and I'm raising this because you spoke of, the people who have led us, and the fact that, you have a president bemoaning the fact that we still have racism in our country. 28 years into democracy. One of the points that the panelists kept on making yesterday was that government alone cannot fight this scourge. It is everybody's responsibility. And I just want to understand what your understanding of that could be, what that could mean, because naively perhaps I say, we elect a government so that it takes care of the many things that we don't take care of. And that's not to say it is their responsibility alone, but I'm always worried when people say, it's not the government's responsibility alone, because often what has happened is that that is usually an admission that we are, we've given up. We can't do this anymore. We've tried, but can't.
But an admission of failure. We cannot let the people we pay and elect off the hook. They need to understand that we're dealing with this. And if we don't deal with it head on, you can't continue pussyfooting on it. It's there. Government is responsible. And yes, certain agencies try to do it. But you look throughout at many of those departments. Education. And we've split education into basic and then higher education and science. In science, in higher education, Naledi Pandor commissioned a study in 2008. Now, that study engaged with all our higher education institutions of learning. It came out with a report, and it's a fairly even-handed, if conservative report. Now, many of our institutions have not even bothered. Name one, and I will retract. To invest in that higher education transformation report on racism and sexism. So we have commissions upon commissions, and then we have this conference say, and look, Vuyo, I am a skeptic about people coming with all sorts of solutions and muting the responsibility of those who are supposed to take care of business in this country. Public officials, persons in power, ought to be held accountable. Those ministers ought to account for what they have done on a racism scorecard, for instance. They ought to account for what they have done on a sexism scorecard. They violence that melds these two scorecards. So if they do those things, then we can say, now it's our turn. But if you have leadership that is inappropriate and not up to the task and fairly average in how it deals with it, hoping it goes away, we will continue from one incident to another, and we'll continue to have racial cataclysms and blame particular groups for what is going on. Let's hold all ourselves accountable. Let's start there. But let's not attenuate the responsibility. The people who should be doing it ought to intercede. And it's going to be interesting because Stellenbosch has been doing a whole lot, issuing statement after statement almost every day. It's going to be interesting to see how they deal with it. If that were an incident, let's change it. If it were the black kid who had done something even half as bad to a white kid, what would have happened? Then there's another scenario. If it was a fellow black kid who had done that to another black kid, what do you think would have happened? Violence. In those two scenarios, there would have been a violence. In this victim scenario, the kid retained his humanity. Indeed, I fear that he went through a whole range of emotions. He needs serious intervention, and not to make him malleable and not to make him comply, but to make him a better man. Indeed, I had a very senior journalist raise with me, what would Steve Biko have done? What would I have done? But we can't compare these. We have not taught and trained and socialized our kids to take their rightful place in the world. The hierarchy of white is bright, white is right is with us. We need to change that.
I'm about to end on this because in the piece you wrote at the weekend, you go on to quote other instances. At UCT, for example, where at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, you're saying, a group of white UCT academics race-baited fellow academics who protested against their unscientific research. And you go on to talk about incidents in other universities as well. Now, given the fact that, these are institutions of higher learning where, these are you should be finding, many of our thought leaders, because, these people deal with information on a day-to-day basis. Do you think that perhaps we are, what should be the role of these universities, in dealing with this scourge? So that they are not, places where, or are we to accept that, they are a mirror of our society? We shouldn't be, surprised.
Well, they ought to be thought leaders. They cannot be distort or distraught leaders. They need to be rising above the fray and show the way. Unfortunately, right now, if we look around at any sector, higher education is under the spotlight now. We don't have the caliber of leaders, the gravitas in almost all sectors of life to say, let's come together, let's look at our issues, because it's not somebody else's issues. It's not for somebody else to do the work. We need to do the work, and I'm now not letting government off the hook, because government ought to do what it's supposed to do. The Ministry of Higher Education ought to be monitoring that 2008 report, and our basic education ought to be teaching and exposing our kids to relating with self and other as equals. Those lofty human rights ideals in our Bill of Rights, in our Constitution, ought to be operationalized. Our kids need to imbibe that, rely on it. It should not be the bourgeoisie, the talking heads speaking about it. And heaven knows, if we, and I'm quoting a statistic now of June last year, 74.7% of mid-teens to mid-20s out of school, out of work, we sitting on a time bomb. We continue to act as if some of these things are not happening, and then the dudulas happen, and then we get worried and we say, no, we are not like this, we are not like that, etc. Plainly, we are in a very bad place And we need the leadership to rise above narrow isms, sectarianism in particular, and come together. So government, and that means parties across the board, need to take heed. And I know that there's been a conversation amongst professional groups right now, my fraternity, psychology, researchers of caliber, race scholars, and civil society organizations. Say we need to look at this, and we've formed an anti-racism council that includes everybody of note in this area, so that we can rise beyond the limitations created by our own origins.
Okay, Prof, that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thank you very much for your time and for your insights, Professor Seth Cooper, who couldn't join us yesterday, but as you've heard, his thoughts prompted, of course, by that Stellenbosch incident, but you know, conscientizing us about so many things that we need to really look into if we are to defeat this scourge of racism. And that's our show for tonight. So join us again tomorrow evening, same time.